University System student. The following presentation, titled Ethics and Invasive Alien Species, is my final project for Philosophy 320 Environmental Ethics, Spring 2018 term. Before we begin, let's look at what we'll be talking about today. To get a proper understanding of what invasive species are, I will define the term and give common examples of both positive and negative impacts. Then I will discuss 3 of the 8 platforms of deep ecology and how they interact with invasive species control. Additionally, I will address biocentric philosophy and human interest. Finally, I'll evaluate several methods of dealing with introduced invasive species and discuss where they might fall within the deep ecology or biocentric view. Invasive alien species. As the name implies, an invasive alien species is one that has been introduced to a new environment and has not only survived, but began to thrive to the point of exponential growth. Like the nutria, who gives birth to a litter of about 13 and goes into heat only 2 days later, according to wetland.org. This often causes negative or harmful effects to the native species, including humans. Albeit given that definition, humans too could be placed on the invasive alien species list. The first invasive species we will look at is the Burmese python. Originating in India, the Burmese python was introduced to the United States as a zoo attraction and exotic pet. However, pet owners soon came to learn that the massive reptile was harder to care for than expected. The owners can be part to blame, as a constant diet of rats and rabbits with little movement encourages the snake to go faster, as it does not burn energy hunting for food. When the size of the animal became too much or natural disaster struck, the snakes were introduced into the wetlands of Florida. This was an opportune for python, as it requires a steady, near constant availability to water, along with steady temperatures that do not go below freezing. The python not only survived in its new habitat, but began to thrive. Outcompeting what were once top predators, such as the alligator or coyote, the numbers grew in the estimated tens of thousands. The snake has been found to eat almost any creature it can swallow without discrimination. This has even included white-tailed deer and alligators. Furthermore, they consume already threatened or endangered species of birds and small animals. The wild hog is a prime example of fortitude. Originating in Europe, the swine was brought to the United States in the 1500s for a source of food. Throughout settlement, the hogs either escaped or were intentionally set free. The numbers began to grow, but in recent decades the population has exploded. It is estimated that Texas alone is home to roughly 2.5 million. And while the American population of wild hogs causes nearly $1.5 billion in damages and control costs, USDA estimates the population in Texas is responsible for up to $500 million in damage due to property destruction, killing or eating of baby livestock, and water contamination. That equates to roughly $200 per animal. These animals breed fast, have an opportunist omnivorous diet, and lack of predators make perfect conditions for rapid population expansion. Like other species, kudzu was introduced by humans. First introduced in the 1870s as decor, its ability to grow rapidly was harnessed in the early 1900s and campaigned as a crop to prevent soil erosion and livestock sustainment. While farmers found the plant economically worthless, as livestock would quickly deplete the plant, areas free from predation experienced another scenario. In the southeast, the plant grows rapidly, up to a foot per day. The plant climbs trees, and like other invasive species, outcompetes for resources. This causes loss of plant biodiversity in the region. Furthermore, soil productivity is degraded, leading again to less biodiversity, which other species rely on for food. Kudzu also causes damage to power lines, $1.5 million in damages per year, and forested lands, $500 million per year, and railroads. Finally, there's the damage to the soybean industry, as it is a carrier of the devastating disease soybean rust. Deep ecology. These examples illustrate just how sensitive ecosystems are. Both the introduction and devastation the introduced species cause show the blatant disregard humans have for that species as well as any other in the ecosystem. It is often due to an anthropocentric thought process, one in which humans regard ourselves as having higher value over other species, if they are considered valuable at all. This idea was challenged by Arnold Ness in 1984 with the introduction of deep ecology philosophy, the basic concept being human lives are no more valuable than the next living organism. This idea is based on eight major points. the inherent value, diversity, vital needs, population, human interference, policy change, quality of life, and obligation of action. For the topic of invasive species, we can look closer at point 2, 3, and 4. Richness and diversity of life forms are values within themselves. Point 2 states that richness and diversity of life forms are also values in themselves and contribute to the flourishing of human and non-human life on Earth. This implies that life itself should be considered a value. The value Ness is referring to is not simply the extrinsic value traditionally placed on other life forms. He is instead referring to the intrinsic value that the life forms have, both within themselves and intrinsic value humans can find. For example, we can see a forest as both extrinsic, use for the trees, and intrinsic for its simple beauty. The beauty does nothing physically for us to survive. We value it because it makes us feel a certain way. It may seem uncommon to think that a plant has intrinsic value because it does not have a traditional sense of consciousness. However, when spoken in terms of worth, it can be looked at differently. Because a plant does not have the ability for cognitive reasoning, it must not have the ability of self-worth. According to deep ecology thinking, not exactly. A plant's worth and a human's worth are different. For a plant to reach its optimal worth or potential, it must remain healthy, be in a suitable location with limited predators, and max availability to nutrients. Similarly, humans on the physical side require the same. The difference is we can move to find the most suitable area. But then reasoning and higher thought come into play. Now we must cater to the psychological side, and fulfilling that sense of worth is much more difficult. This leads back to, if the plant can fulfill its worth or potential, it should have value. The final principle to this point is all life has the ability to respond to external stimuli and will, in their own way, fight to survive. Vital needs. The third point of deep ecology states humans have no right to reduce this richness and diversity except to satisfy vital needs. This is a stark statement to a species that has developed societies around the idea of right over land and the right to stuff. It is hard, nay impossible, to change that ideal when it is continuously fostered. And what exactly is vital? Is this referring to just physical vital survival needs? It is important to note that Ness said the wording in this point was left vague intentionally. To quote, "The term vital need is left deliberately vague to allow for considerable latitude in judgment. Differences in climate and related factors, together with differences in the structures of societies as they now exist, need to be considered. Also, the difference between a means to the satisfaction of the need and the need itself must be considered. Therefore, it is the interpretation not only to the individual but to the system as a whole on what is considered vital." This again is a brash statement, as human species in their individuality tend to enjoy using their higher power and free will to choose and do as they see fit. This again is a clear indication of anthropocentric and potentially narcissistic, depending on inclination. Ness and his philosophy of deep ecology want people to break away from this mindset and see the larger picture, how everything is connected, and we do not have a right to selfishly destroy those connections outside of our vital necessities. Point 4. Point 4 has a very dark undertone that could easily be misinterpreted. It states, "The flourishing of human life and cultures is compatible with a substantial decrease of the human population. The flourishing of non-human life requires such a decrease." At first glance, this point is practically socially unacceptable to say. However, if looked at in practical terms, there is a scientific and common sense idea. Chernobyl is a great example of how without human interaction, non-human life will flourish, even after a catastrophe. This does not mean all human life needs to be removed for natural processes to occur. It does, however, mean less human interaction is required. As the example of invasive species show, human interaction causes destruction even when unintentional. Biocentrism. Biocentrism and deep ecology seem to go hand in hand. It is based on 4 central points. The belief that humans are members of Earth's community of life in the same sense and on the same terms in which other living members of that community. B. The belief that human species, along with other species, are integral elements of a system of interdependence such that the survival of each living thing, as well as its chances of faring well or poorly, is determined not only by the physical conditions of the environment, but also by its relations to other living things. C. The belief that all organisms are teleological centers of life in the sense that each is a unique individual pursuing its own good in its own way. D. The belief that humans are not inherently superior to other living things. Much like point 1 and 2 of deep ecology, Biocentrism is asking humans to go against their lifelong teachings to see a bigger, broader picture. Paul Taylor, the author of Respect for Nature, a theory of environmental ethics, explains in detail how each individual human or non-human has a sense of good or worth to be achieved. He also explains that there are external and internal limitations for humans meeting their sense of worthwhile, while other species may only face external limitations. One of the most noteworthy statements, however, was, "There is in fact that while we cannot do without them, they can do without us." With these simple explanations of deep ecology and biocentrism in place, it is time to look at current solutions to the aforementioned invasive species and determine if the solution is anywhere in line with these philosophical ideas, and if not, what ideas would be. Referring back to Florida's problem with Burmese python, one of the current solutions is removal by allowing hunters and snake wranglers to remove the threatened species. This has been met with little success, as the first trial only yielded around 50 removed pythons. As discussed earlier, the species is estimated to be in the tens of thousands throughout Florida's wetlands. Regarding deep ecology, we look at the species in several ways. 1. We recognize the snake has value within its natural ecosystem. 2. The removal of the snake is the disruption of biodiversity. However, when we see the snake itself is a disruption to the natural habitat. Secondly, the vital needs of humans are not threatened. The python does not disrupt human lives by invading homes and eating pets. 3. If human intervention of populations ceased to exist in the area, the species would eventually decimate the natural habitat. Given these points, it is fair to say that humans can remove the invasive python while still recognizing its value in its natural habitat. Biocentrism would have us look in another manner. Even though humans cause the invasion, the snakes have every right to live as humans. The snake is doing no wrong, as it is trying to reach its full potential or worth. And given these two ideas, humans do not have a right to intervene by killing the snake and should find a way to live with the python or find a more suitable method such as capture and relocation. The wild hog, as explained, also wreaks havoc on its newfound habitat. The solution for many years has been massive removal of the species through hunting efforts. With a new solution in research being poisoning with sodium nitrate in a way that it will not affect other species, we can apply similar explanation of both deep ecology and biocentrism, albeit minor differences. The hog does have value, only this time humans can see it as an extrinsic value much easier than intrinsic. Unlike the python, the hog does impede on human vital needs. Ranchers and farmers are directly affected by the destruction of land and crops the animal causes, thereby creating negative effects on the human's livelihood. Furthermore, the hog is outcompeting other species and destroying flora and fauna life at a rapid rate. The harvesting of the animal also fulfills a human vital need, as it provides food, especially when donated to the less fortunate. Again, without human intervention, the species would flourish, out of control, and reduce the natural ecosystem's biodiversity. Looking at the wild hog from a deep ecology view is practical. It identifies the hog as a hardy species with a knack for survival, but understands that the negative impacts and potential benefits of harvesting are within means and rights of humans. The biocentric outlook again would state, even though humans cause the invasion, they have every right to live as humans. The hog is doing no wrong as it's trying to reach its full potential or worth. And given these ideas, humans do not have the right to intervene by killing the hog, and using the excuse to fulfill a need such as hunger can be mitigated by finding other sources of food that would not affect the species negatively. Both viewpoints have a negative stance on the unethical removal of the animal, such as using explosives. And some groups, such as the Animal Rights Foundation of Florida, find the use of dogs unethical on the grounds of unnecessary pain to the hog and potential injury to the dog. While difficult, it can be considered that the aforementioned species, being animals, have a conscious thought of their own well-being. They learn to avoid danger, hunt for food to survive, and seek best area to reproduce to increase numbers. But how does the deep ecology and biocentric thought apply to plants? The current solution in the southeast to remove the plant is to trim, dig, burn, and herbicide. The latter treatment brings up the concern Rachel Carson expressed in Silent Spring with pesticides. What was once an acceptable answer to deal with a problem soon became a rampant hazard that has affected species far beyond the original scope. Referring again to the points of deep ecology, Although kudzu is a plant, it has value as a living thing. It adds to the biodiversity it is inhabiting. However, it is noxious to the natural plant life in the area. Like other invasive species, lack of human intervention would allow the plant to flourish, although it would be to a point of outcompeting most other plants in the area, leading to destruction of that biodiversity. Biocentric view on the plant would state, although it is a plant, it is equal to humans in the sense they are both connected and share the space on Earth. Furthermore, the human has no more right to the space than the plant. Although the plant does not have a brain, it is capable of responding to certain threats, spreading to the best suitable areas, and reproducing at a rate that fulfills its worth. The excuse that the plant is inconvenience for humans is not tangible enough to warrant removal. The idea that the species is destroying other species is left to a thought of natural selection. Having a concern, though of the individual, biocentrism would have humans find non-destructive ways to live with kudzu unless absolutely necessary for removal. In the ideas of deep ecology and biocentrism are in a sense combined, yet slightly altered, we get ecocentrism. While biocentrism focuses on the good of the individual, ecocentrism focuses on the good of the community as a whole, which in turn would allow for the removal of these invasive species for the betterment of the ecosystem. Likewise, taking an ecocentric approach would place more responsibility on humans to look beyond the extrinsic value Leopold talks about in the land ethic, namely his example of farmers who only see the land in terms of economic value and what it can do for them. The ecocentric look would have the farmer consider all aspects of the land and conduct practices for longer-term health, not short-term gain. In contrast, there are cases in which dealing with an invasive species has positive impacts. For instance, an article published in Trends in Ecology and Evolution said this: an invasive tree in Florida has a positive impact on honey production, roughly $15 million annually. But removing this species would result in a $168 million gain in ecotourism dollars that would otherwise be lost if the tree were left to infest the Everglades and other South Florida natural areas. The introduction of bush-tailed possums to New Zealand has resulted in massive defloration, but is also highly profitable for the eco-friendly fur industry, at least $20 million a year in exports. Both of these cases illustrate that the costs and benefits of invasive alien species can be distributed differently. Those who benefit do not pay the costs, and those who lose are not compensated. In conclusion, the views of deep ecology and biocentrism go far beyond the common viewpoints of today, often looking at other species for their extrinsic value, except the already established forests and parks for their intrinsic value. Humans have little regard for their actions when dealing with an individual species. Releasing a python or two in the wetlands of Florida, introducing pigs to a new world to provide food, or planting an exotic plant for decoration. These selfish actions ultimately resulted in problems for humans, animals, and plants alike. In fashion, it could be agreed that all species are equal in the sense that they are all impacted. However, the threatened and endangered birds that are prey to the snake, nor the trees being choked by the kudzu plant have the ability to act in betterment of themselves or the ecosystem as a whole. Humans, having the capability and sense of morality, should be compelled to act in a manner that benefits the system as a whole. This is a non-traditional viewpoint, especially in materialistic-driven cultures. However, contemplating and discussing the value different organisms have to the overall system is the start to seeing a bigger picture we all live in. References. This concludes the presentation. I hope you enjoyed learning about ethics and invasive alien species.